Well, folks, thank you for joining us for the sixth session in our series here about America's Seed Fund. Today, we're going to talk about the kind of phase two transition. And phase two is really taking the results from your phase one work and scaling it up, seeing what else you need to do, how to actually start to align it for the future, and also how to actually start to grow your company so that you can succeed in the marketplace. Because keep in mind that with the SBIR and STTR programs, everything is about getting to the market in the future, whether that's the broader commercial market, whether that's actually delivering a solution for something like a contracting agency. You have to be able to create a product and a product that somebody needs, somebody wants, and somebody will ultimately pay for. So in today's session, going to kind of first start off with the purpose of the phase two. So, what is phase two about? Why is phase two important? What do people actually focus on? Kind of what's necessary. Then we're going to talk about that aspect of just moving beyond feasibility, which is really the hallmark of your phase two. In your phase one, you establish that this is possible. This is something that could happen. This is a problem that can be solved. This is an objective that we can reach. And then, so now that your phase one is done, well, what do you do? And it is about that moving beyond the this is possible to now we have to do it. Then we're going to talk about kind of scaling up and what scaling up actually means in the confines of thinking about the future, thinking about growth, thinking about development, and then hopefully thinking about ultimate success. And then a little bit about that kind of business development backbone, because a big portion of that scale up, particularly when you're looking at something like a phase two, is to actually start to scale the business, start to get that business acumen, business expertise, and those business growth success markers and metrics into place. But let's go ahead and start off with what is phase two? So if you think back to our first session, we talked about the fact that the SBIR and STTR programs are a phased program. You have a phase one, and it's a little bit less money, and about a 1-year time period. Some agencies, it's 8 months, some 9 months, some of them can even be 13 months, but roughly about a year. And then if you're successful there, you move on to a phase two. And that phase two is kind of about that growth, that development pipeline and pathway, and that demonstration. So phase two does represent a pretty big shift in the ultimate project goals. So the goals of what you're doing under this project. Because remember that agencies don't want to fund a phase one. They don't even want to fund a phase two. They want to fund an SBIR project. And that project includes the idea to ideation, to prototyping, to success, to growth, to ultimate marketplace. And that's that entirety of that project. And that phase two is really about kind of moving it to the next steps, taking it to the place that now that you have shown this is feasible, well, we have to actually demonstrate that feasibility. We have to validate that our thoughts on this is feasible because X will actually work. You can kind of think of it like when you have a piece of software. Anybody that's used a piece of software knows that you go from things like a beta test where there's a lot of bugs to work out. Things just don't work right. The system crashes. There's something that actually is a barrier and bars you from doing what you intended to do by purchasing the software or being in an early access program or whatever that kind of release looks like. And it's getting it to a full release. The things that kind of have to be finalized, to be able to push it out for public consumption, for public use, for public validation. And that's really kind of the goal of a phase two, is to take that, well, we think because, and go, well, no, this works and we can actually prove it. We can show it. Now, that obviously requires a lot of effort. In your phase one, you have a lot of development, you have a lot of research time, and that's where a lot of that effort goes. It's just that kind of further research showing that because of X, we should be able to do Y. Or the scientific principle and underpinning says this should do it. We need to do some further research. Now, to get it into something that is validated, they give you about twice as long. So we talked about the fact that phase ones are typically about a year, phase twos are typically about 2 years. So you're actually doubling the time period. But the doubling of the time period isn't really the big focus, it's the shift in funding, because you go from 175, 200K on average, all the way up to roughly about 1 million on average now. So it's this gigantic leap in funding. And you go, well, that seems like a lot more money. Well, that's because it's a lot more work. There's kind of that also shift in the outside influence on who's part of the project, what others can do, and how much they can actually contribute to moving the idea materially forward. So in a phase one, when you're working with sub-awards on an SBIR, you have that roughly third of the work. A third of the work can go to outsiders. Well, with the phase two, it actually shifts to 50-50. They know that you're still trying to grow. They know that you're still trying to kind of set up, or hopefully, but thinking of it like the first time awardee, they know that there's steps you have to take to actually become viable for the future. And they go, okay, that typically requires some outside influence, whether it's a university, whether it's a research lab, whether it's even something like a prime organization that may acquire this in the future. Maybe you have a cooperative research and development agreement with somebody. Maybe it's partnering with another business that's going to do things like the manufacturing, the distribution, things like that. They allow for that to go, okay, there's going to be some gaps here. You're going to have to bring in more resources. You're going to have to bring in more tools. You're going to have to bring in more access. Let's give you that flexibility and allow you to actually set up and create that progressive, positive relationship for the future. And, phase two is really kind of that rampway for the future. Projects are really kind of seen in that light. Phase one, you had some overall guesses. You had some ideas to start out with. You had some, back of the napkin scrawls that said, yeah, maybe this will be cool. Or you had just a need that you identified and said, man, if this thing could only do this, it would really solve my problem. It would really change people's lives. Well, now you have to actually prove that out. Also things like you gave some maybe overall ideas for what that potential commercial potential was. Well, now you have to actually ground that in reality. The commercialization information you put into phase one is usually page, maybe a couple of pages, and all of a sudden you have a 10, 12, 15-page commercialization plan. They want to know that this is solid. There's something here. And maybe your objective was a bit conservative. One of the things that happens a lot of times in phase one proposals is people will have 6 or 7 technical objectives, and that's just way overscoped. Well, in a phase two, now you can have those 6 or 7. You can take that complementary or that, supplementary thing that actually happens from the innovation that you're putting into effect and go, well, we also have to figure these things out. You rack and stack those problems that are keeping you from getting into the market, besides funding, and saying, okay, these 4 things are super critical, but this top one, that's just going to keep us from doing anything else. Well, now in your phase two, you have that ability to take a look at those items 2 through 4 that there just wasn't enough time or funding to actually really dive into them. It's also kind of that place where you start to figure out, well, what's this product going to look like? I had some ideas. I thought it was feasible, but I really just need to start to define this on when somebody picks this up, when somebody buys this, what's in the box? If this was on the end cap of every Walmart across America, when somebody takes that to the register to purchase it, they get it home, they open it. What's inside there? What does it look like? What does it feel like? How does it integrate? How does it operate? And your work plan for a phase two needs to actually reflect all of these items. It needs to reflect that push into this is what the product will actually look like. It needs to reflect that push into this is what people will find valuable about it. It needs to reflect that this is going to be the benefit, and it needs to reflect that, okay, well, to do that, there's a lot of technical stuff we have to figure out. We have to actually establish exactly what this is going to look like, how it's going to operate, all of those fundamentals that actually come with a product and when people try to use it. But keep in mind that these programs are America's seed fund. It's a seed, it's a start, but you have to nurture that. You have to bring in other elements that are actually going to help it grow so that it can bear fruit, so that you get some positive benefit out of it. There kind of has to be that plan for, okay, phase one got us here, phase two is going to get us here, but it's probably not going to get us all the way. What else needs to happen? What else can we do? What else is kind of beyond that phase two envelope? And that's actually going to be the focus of our next session, is just talking about, once you get done with your phase two, where else do you go? What else can you do? What do you need to kind of start thinking about that? Because phase two really is the culmination of the funding that can be tied to your project through SBIR and STTR. There is no phase three. Yeah, there are certain like GSA vehicles for contract procurement, but those are kind of few and far between. They're very specialized, they're very focused. When people talk about phase three, it is really that self-funded, outside funded. Now, there are some complementary things, there are some supplemental things, but they're a little bit outside the confines. There has to be a different bent, there has to be, kind of cost matching or investor match. There has to be something else that is kind of brought to the table. And your plans for moving forward kind of need to speak to that as well. We're going to talk a little bit in depth about like the commercialization stuff in a few more slides, and you'll see what that means. There has to be something you identify as, we know that we're going to get to a certain point at the end of phase two, but there's still going to be a gap before we can go, we're in the marketplace, we're selling, we're making money, man, we are so good. So how are you going to fill that gap? But before we talk about that, so what do we actually mean by, beyond feasibility? Because that phase one was that feasibility. Can this potentially work? And that phase two has to be that validation and demonstration. You're actually going from transformation for that idea into a reality, something people could potentially put their hands on. That doesn't mean it needs to be, physical. There's a lot of like digital things that come out of SBIR and STTR. Could be a process, could be a service. It could even be a license. That could be the product that you actually develop. You can recognize, well, we'll never be able to create this thing ourselves, but we found a manufacturing partner, we're going to license this out to them for them to create, because the product is really just your revenue stream. How are you making money for the company? How's the company going to grow? How's it actually going to be able to hire more people, pay more in wages, increase its own tax base, that kind of stuff. So that's what that movement is going from that we think to somebody's going to buy this. And there's a lot of different kind of ways you can figure that out, and you can actually approach that. And that's why, when you're thinking of Like even your phase one, your milestones that you're setting, the goals that you're setting, the things that you're going to say, work, we can get it to this point, and then if we get to this point, we know we can further grow it. We know we can actually take it to the next step in a phase two. So they kind of need to be that minimum standard. You go, well, ultimately we want a 40%, decrease in energy consumption. If we can show a 10% in phase one, we know that we can put a little bit more thought power into it, a little bit more elbow grease, a little bit more materials creation or manufacture, something else, and we could potentially get it to that 40%. Because if you set your bar at like 95% right out of the gate, well, where can you go in the future? How can you actually grow it? How can you get it to that? Okay, well, we're able to show this. But then also, if you don't hit that marker, well, you weren't successful. That's actually going to kind of weigh against what you could potentially do in the future and potentially your ability to get funded for your phase two. Something even like, say you were able to make a new material. Well, now you need to show that you can produce it at scale, produce it, the same way every time. You take that first batch, that almost that early stage prototype batch, and you go, okay, we know that eventually we're going to have to make 1,000,000 tons of this every single year, or whatever that non-astronomical number is. So we need to show that we can actually reproduce this, that it's not just a one-off. We don't have a miracle baby. We have something that's awesome, something that's great, but we can just crank these out. It's almost like you think about like the old cartoons and they show those manufacturer stamp lines and it's just one after another, after another, after another. So you need to figure out how you can actually do that, how you can get it to that point, how you can actually say, okay, well, this is this critical element. This is the thing that's going to drive it. It's going to work. But now we need to show how we can actually make sure it works constantly. If anybody's familiar with like the patent process, it's like going from that provisional where you say, we think we have an idea, we're going to do something in the future, to actually being able to showcase it and say, well, we figured it out. We figured out exactly how it works, why it works, how it works every time. Now we can go for that full patent. That's almost that kind of differentiation between a phase one and a phase two. And because it is also that kind of expansion of that critical problem. In your phase one, you identified that here's the critical problem. Here is the number one thing that says this shouldn't be possible. And we figured it out. So you kind of focused on showing that it could be solved. So now you're actually, again, solving it. So there are certain things that, a lot of different people do. Maybe it's actually to look at the unintended consequences of that problem and, address those in a phase two. Something like we made the material 30% lighter. Well, it's lighter. Now we have to see, well, what are the impacts of that? It's this material, it's 30% lighter, but when we put it into this system, does that actually, decrease the capacity, the weight capacity and limits of it? Is it something that it actually decreases the resistance to weathering? Can we do some long endurance and duration testing on it to show that it holds up under, extreme thermal temperatures? It is that thing that says, okay, just because we did this, we don't know if it's going to continue to work. We need to be able to demonstrate that it will continue to work. Or it's even things like looking at like the ancillary issues that surround the problem. We showed that this widget that we want to create is feasible. So now we actually need to see that, okay, well, if we replace that, what about kind of the inputs to that manufacturing and design process? Does that keep it from being able to integrate into this larger system? The things that are going to almost keep it from being viable in the future for a customer to go, yeah, I can actually do that. That's why customer discovery is really, our customer discovery and validation are really, really crucial when you're thinking about how do I take this to the next step? Because you have to create it to what that customer wants, what that customer is going to be able to have, and what that customer is going to be able to use. Or, even just looking at the kind of cascading effects that the solution brings. If you change how something that people expect to function in a certain way now functions in a different way because they don't know the problem can be solved, well, what else does that do to that environment? Is it something that they have to change their mind flow, change their mindset, change how they interact with it? Well, how do those interactions need to kind of be structured? Is there something that the product needs to do that really does break that mold? Because it should be breaking that mold in some fashion. And now you need to figure out, well, how do we make sure that the mold stays broken? How do we just smash it to smithereens so nobody can build that mold anymore? And just kind of really, the thing about your phase two is taking the results of what happened at that phase one and lining it up with that ultimate finalized goal of an impactful product, something that's going to be impactful to people's lives. It's how can we affect the future? And how can we actually make sure that the effect is going to stay kind of in place as the future continues to grow, as the possible state of industry, state of innovation, state of the art tries to catch up to it. It may sound like a really dumb analogy here, but you think about like, well, I want to get back in shape. So that phase one is okay, well, you got off the couch and you joined a gym. That's that first step. That's that you solved the critical problem. I gave myself the vehicle to do this. Well, that phase two is, well, what do you need to do? How do you action it? How do you put it in place so that you have that beach bod for the future? Because that was your ultimate goal. You took the initial step in phase one. Well, now you need to actually do the work in the phase two. And some people actually will do something like take that innovation to the next logical step in a phase two. You showed that it could actually function in a phase one. So how do you continue to further that innovative component of it in that phase two? So maybe it's something like, you solved for X in the phase one, but that solving for X is just that bare minimum, that baseline standard you needed to do. So now you bring in the Y and the Z, you make it more complex, you make it more difficult because they fund you for it to be more difficult. Remember, it's 4 to 5 times the amount of funding and double the time. They give you that leeway to add complexity and re-add risk to the project. Now, your phase one kind of de-risked it. It de-risked the technology. Well, now because you are ramping up the technology, you're going to introduce risk again. And it's fine for it to be riskier. It's fine for going, yeah, that phase one is great and all. And what we showed is really cool. But if we could just take it to this level, we can really change the world. We can change how people think about this. We can change how this problem affects people's lives. We can change how this need actually affects, the environment, just whatever that is. Just kind of think about any modern piece of technology. What is the real heart of that? What's the thing that it did? Even things like the shrinking of microprocessors. They got faster, they got smaller, they got lighter. So that may have been the result of like the phase one. And the phase two was, well, what does that do to things like cell phones? Now they're lighter, they're faster, they're stronger, more durable, whatever. Maybe it changes the way that you need to power it. Maybe it changes the way that you need to think about refresh rates on a camera. There are those things that actually are secondary that come about from innovation. And so that's what your phase two is about. It's about, solving those secondary issues, solving those things that said, okay, I affected this one thing. Now I need to show that it's something that is really going to be revolutionary. So to go along with that, there's going to be some differences in how you approach a phase one proposal versus a phase two proposal. Your phase one is a little bit pie in the sky. Yes, it is rooted in some, scientific principles. It's rooted in some data and information that says, yeah, this will potentially work. So now you have to say, well, we show that it potentially works. So here's exactly how it works. Here's what happened. Here's what happened during our phase one and the results. And here's how we're going to continue to build upon it. Because we showed that this, process or this fundamental idea could actually be applied in this area, well, we need to continue on with that. And it's also a huge expansion of the commercial plan and the strategy. In a phase one, it's fine to have relative information. You only have, 2 or 3 pages typically in that phase one with that commercialization plan. It's an overall idea. It's well, this could be the market, this could be the customer. And in that phase two, it's like, nope, this is the customer, this is the value we give them, this is the benefit it brings, this is why they would do it, this is what they said about it. Here's the structure of how, revenue streams are going to actually come into effect. Here's, a 3 to 5 year goal on that. It's really getting that fleshed out and making it reasonable to have that pathway into the marketplace. And that plan kind of needs to be in place. It doesn't have to be acted upon at this time, but there needs to be a good and needs to be a solid plan. And that comes along with that kind of plan to go beyond the SBIR and STTR programs. They're probably not going to get you into the market, depending on what you're creating. If you're creating a new health technology, biomed, something like that, well, $2 million is a drop in the bucket when you think of things like human trials, you think of things like, clinical trials, you think of things like FDA compliance, you think of things like your 501 filings and all that comes with it. But $2 million is just kind of shaving off the first surface there. So you're going to have some ability to go outside of these programs and get other funding, actually, partner for going forward, do things like that cooperation for that research and, further development, whatever that is. And you have to have something that says, yeah, we know we're going to have to do this. And here's how we think we can do this. Again, you don't need that set in place. You don't need that set in stone, but you have to have reasonable and justifiable ideas. Because just like everything else, it really needs to be justified. If you say you're going to change the market and change the world with this product that you're going to be developing, your phase two commercialization plan needs to show that and needs to kind of validate that, just like you would do with the technical portion of your phase two. It needs to be validated, it needs to be reasonable, and you have to give that explanation. You can't just say, well, it should work. Well, why should it work? How did you come up with this idea? Because that's the thing about kind of the reasonableness, and it's a lot heavier when it comes into the phase two, is it's not really making it reasonable to an outsider. It's how you justify that it's reasonable for you to believe that you can do it. Because if you're doing it right, that actually goes into making it reasonable to an outsider. You're the expert. You're just telling people why they should trust kind of your opinion on why you're the expert, why you know this. And a big thing in your phase two that is really that transition and shift is getting the buy-in and how important that is for the buy-in. Because that commercial plan and that kind of pipeline and pathway for the future is really a make or break aspect of your phase two proposal. I've actually seen really good technical write-ups and projects that had really good, technical depth, but they were rejected because their commercialization plan was all out of whack. You can have the best technology in the world, but if you can't get it into somebody's hands, if you can't make a product out of it, why are these programs going to fund you? That's the entire idea with these. So there has to be that kind of marriage between the technical side and the business side. Things like having letters of support become extremely, extremely vital and important for a phase two. Phase one can have weak letters of support, can have, letters that are like, yeah, if this works out, we might be interested. Or it could even have no letters, but you're not going to get away with that in a phase two. And they need to be kind of strong customer buy-in letters from actual customers. For certain things, people go, well, I'm going to sell this to a university, or I'm going to sell this to a federal or a governmental agency. That's actually not really a strong letter of support. Having a letter of support is great, but those are limited volume customers. You're not really going to be able to build a successful business that will continue to grow and continue to succeed in the future. So you have to talk about that. Yeah, your beachhead can be them, but where else are you going to go? What else are you going to do? That's a limited market, but it's not going to affect the future of the company because of X, Y, and Z that's going to come out of it. It has to read kind of a lot like a business plan. Things like revenue forecasts, company capability capture. Where else are you going to go? What tools, what resources, what do you have in-house? What do you need to bring in from the outside? That kind of expertise validation, pain point validation, how you actually address that pain point. All of these aspects have to be in place for you to actually be able to succeed in getting that phase two. And that can be a lot of work for a lot of people when coming out of a phase one. That's why it's really important to use the resources available to you. Things like TABA funding for your phase one can pay for someone to actually sit down, help you figure this out, do some research for you so that you can properly create this. So you can create a complete and a compelling, market section or identification of your intellectual property strategy, which is about that, competitive edge and advantage. If you, protect this right, up to 20 years of competitive advantage. How are you going to, capsulate on that? How are you going to make sure that that moves forward? And another, way that the, kind of entire phase two process, not just the proposal is different, is it's also a glimpse of the future. So your phase two is a really good place to start to bring in information from that agency's 5-year strategic plan. Every agency has one. It's kind of their focus as an organization for those next 5 fiscal years. What's important to them? What do they identify as critical things? What do they identify as going to be their priorities for the next 5 fiscal years? Now, you don't have to, directly address those issues, but how are you moving the bar forward that it can actually align with that? A lot of agencies funded the phase one because they saw it as something that matched their goals, matched their priorities, and what do we think is a critical issue that needs to be addressed and solved? So how do you actually demonstrate that to the agency? For things like contracting agencies, that phase two is actually where you're going to conform to their standards, their requirements, the things they actually have to have, like the product do. A lot of times you'll hear it referred to as what they call SWAP, size, weight, and power. It is part of a larger ecosystem of solutions. It needs to be able to integrate into that. So how do you work with them on that? How do you actually get that buy-in? It's going to be testing, prototyping, feedback, change management for that. And you need to be able to kind of demonstrate that you're going to adhere to those goals with your phase two. Now, obviously, that's going to require you to kind of scale up, scale the technology, but also scale the business, because that's a big part of where you're going to go, not just in the phase two, but right after the phase two. You're not only just scaling the project and scaling the eventual product that comes out of it, but you're also starting to scale the business. They give you 4 times the budget. The expectation is that's 4 times the work. You're probably going to need, 4 times the staff or 4 times the dedication from that staff. It's not that you're going to pay them 4 times, the price you paid them in, your phase one. You're not going to take them from an $80,000 salary to a $320,000 salary. There has to be more dedication, more things that you're trying to do, more people that you're bringing in, more outside influences that come in and, kind of help out, allow you access to the resources that you didn't have, allow you access to expertise that is going to kind of bring you forward. Because the expectation is when you get out of phase two, you should almost be ready for the market. You're going to be able to grow your company to be ready for commercialization. And that's a lot of work. That's a lot of funding. That's a lot of stuff that actually just has to line up. So maybe you're bringing on, expanded technical talent. You had a team of 2 in your phase one. Well, now you need a team of 6. Or securing that, business development talent. The people that are going to help you get into the market, the people that are, MBAs, C-suite executives, those people that go, well, we know the business mechanisms, we know the business mechanics. You're going to license this. You need to actually start figuring out things like agreements. What are they actually licensing? That business aspect and the business portion of the team becomes very, very critical when you're looking at this transition from a phase one to a phase two. Keep in mind, though, marketing is not an acceptable or an allowed line item. So you're doing things like using your indirect cost or that fee/profit that you're allowed to take. You're getting yourself ready to functionally work just as a business, not a, well, I'm trying to create this business and this is a side project. This needs to represent that shift into, nope, I am full-time, full bore, just full steam ahead on this business. And it needs to actually be a business. And even doing things like putting agreements into place for the manufacturing and distribution. A lot of first-time awardees are not going to create the product themselves. Product manufacture is kind of a nightmare if you don't have the resources to support it, you don't have the capability, the facilities. And to get to that space, probably going to be a couple $1,000,000 just to set up a manufacturing line, to retool a line that's already there, to actually expand a manufacturing capability, to expand distribution channels. So a lot of people will bring in a collaborative partner for that. Maybe they enter a joint venture. Maybe they're actually offshoring the work in some capacity. Maybe they're actually doing that license to somebody else to create it, and maybe it actually does lead to, a collaborative development, something like a CRADA. But almost always there's going to be some sort of agreement on, we want to be able to create this. We know it would take us 5 years to get to a space that we can make, 1,000 of these a month. And that's the only thing that makes sense to us as a business. So we need to get outside help. Remember, that's why you actually do get that ability to do that 50-50 split on internal business versus outsiders in your budget for your phase two. Because again, the goal of a phase two and the intended, let's call it stoppage point, is to get to a production ready prototype, something that addresses the need, people can actually use, people want, people will be able to purchase, people will be able to purchase from a certain way that they like purchasing things, that channel that you're using, those, outside relationships, just kind of whatever that looks like. The thing that it conforms to the customer expectations. They want to buy something that will do Y. And you tell them, well, we can't actually do that, but we have set this other thing for you. It's like that snake oil salesman. They say, we can solve everything for you. We have the cure for this. Well, it's actually not going to cure it, but you can still buy it from me. So you have to conform to their expectations of what it's actually going to do for them and why they actually need it. And also kind of be ready for those things like economies of scale. If you're making a product and the expectation is that, well, we're going to sell 14 of these a year. We're going to be profitable. That thing better be a couple $1 million per unit, or it needs to be created in such a way that it can actually scale. It's not just going to ultimately break the bank. Now, are you going to get there in that phase two? Probably not. But you need to start thinking about those mechanisms and those mechanics of, okay, well, how do we get there in the future? And this is why that proper planning becomes so important, and being able to kind of explain that plan, explain why, yeah, we're not going to be able to get there here because we know this, but we're working on getting those, agreements in place. We're working on, getting those active relationships and active partnerships in place. And again, just kind of not necessarily creating the thing, but knowing how it's going to go from a raw material to a customer hand. And you don't need to be the person that's delivering it into the customer hands, but you need to know how it's going to actually get there, how it's going to function, and how they're going to use it in the future. Now, is this a realistic expectation for, small startups, first time awardees in their phase two? No, not at all. Again, that's why there's, supplemental and complementary fundings out there, and things like those VC accelerators, that kind of stuff. But it is about knowing the steps in the future and being able to explain those steps that you're going to be able to take in the future, why they're the right steps, why they should actually work. How are you going to make sure that the customer's in the loop and you're validating kind of each key step and each key decision along the way, and what this is ultimately going to look like, how that meets the customer expectations, the customer wants, the customer needs. Because that is or really can be a big portion of your phase two, is that really customer definition and that push into the customer zeitgeist. It has to have that extensive outreach and value proposition defining. And which really is just kind of that scaling for the market. So there's kind of three types of scaling you need to be ready for a phase two: scaling the technology, scaling the business, and then scaling for market. Because market and business are not necessarily the same thing. Yeah, it's going to be a business effort to get into the market, but you need to make sure that you have the capacity, you have the tools, you have the knowledge, the expertise, the whatever it is that's going to be able to keep the business operational so that you can actually get into the market. Now, a lot of times in your phase one, you're going to do some sort of customer discovery. A lot of the granting agencies kind of force you to go through like an I-Corps program, or, I forget what the NASA one is termed, Ignite, something like that, where they go, okay, we know that you know your technical stuff, but you probably don't know business. You probably don't know the market. You're going to do customer discovery. So you have some results. You know some ways that things need to be solved. You know what the actual critical problem is. Maybe it's not actually the problem that your customer tells you, because they don't know the real problem or the underpinnings that drive their need, that drive the, I wish I had something that did this, or man, if somebody could only solve this, it's going to make my life so much easier. And now you're trying to kind of align that with, where's this going to be, what it's going to do, what does this need to look like? How do we respond to those wants? How do we respond to those requirements? How do we get in those channels that they're going to have? And channels here is sales channels, because you have to be where your customer is going to be. You can't have a customer that, only buys things through a very specific process, and you're going to say, well, I'm not going to follow that process though. We're going to be here. We're going to be in Best Buy, and I expect you to come here to buy it. They're just not going to do that. You need to be where the customers are, where they're used to being, where they can actually make purchases. Because sometimes there's a purchase decision process that they have to adhere to. A lot of times, particularly if you're not, well, this isn't a big factor if you're like business to consumer or B2C, but if you're a business to business or a business to government, there is a specific process that has to go into effect for them to be able to buy stuff. And you need to know why that is. Well, you don't really need to know why that is, but you need to know how to operate in that space. You need to be able to elucidate the value proposition as it relates to that particular persona. If you're developing something for a specific group of doctors and you go, this is going to be the best product ever, you're going to be able to buy this from me. And they go, well, we don't buy stuff. We go through a hospital purchasing decision. So you need to be able to tell that agent or that agency in a larger term, not federal agency, why this would be beneficial to them. A lot of this kind of, particularly scaling towards the market, is going to be navigating the different value propositions that you offer to the different customers with this one thing you're going to do. Your value for that doctor is going to be different versus the value that, the hospital gets out of it. Yeah, the doctor will work faster, be able to do better. Why is that important to the hospital? Well, it's cost savings. It allows them to do X. It allows them to actually see more patients, whatever that, driver is for them. So some of your phase two, you're actually going to spend in that customer selection and push on figuring out their economies. Why is this important to them? What does it save them? Because at the end of the day, the color of the world is green. It's a lot of times about cost savings. Well, why is that cost savings? For if you're in the end user market and just delivering something to, the overall B2C, like Joe Blow walks in and buys it, that's not important to them. But any other target, you're going to have to know that. You're going to have to figure that out. And you're going to have to dedicate some time to that during the phase two. So now that you kind of need to build that business and get ready for that scaling. Well, what does that actually mean? What can you do? A lot of times that scaling and that scale up is going to be personnel related. You're bringing on additional talent and areas of just needed development. Typically, you're starting to build a strong sales team, business operations or technical operations, and finding those outside resources. Like getting a law professional on retention. You don't have to go out there and hire a lawyer and build an internal legal department, but at least having somebody that is a business law professional that you can tap into. Because remember, you're trying to get ready to be an actual market factor and hopefully in the future a market giant. There's a lot of agreements and things that go into place. You have to know, certain laws, certain regulations, certain things that have to be structured in a certain way so that you're compliant. Or maybe it's even doing things like building an advisory board, people that have been in people that were in the industry for 20 or 30 years. We'll be able to actually give you some advice. We'll be able to mentor you on these steps. And real quick note here for people, you'll see that I have here either building business operations or building, technical operations, because you're not going to be able to serve both sides. In a phase one, the expectation isn't that you're a quote unquote real business. So yeah, you can actually do that. You can be both sides of the equation. But once you actually get into the space that the expectation is that you're trying to grow to be a real functional, operational, successful business, you're just not going to have the manpower to do both in one single person. And their brain's not going to lead to that. You have people that can do both, but they're always going to lean one side towards the business, one side towards the technology. So you're either going to be able to move the business forward or move the technology forward. And whichever one you decide you want to do, you need to actually find the, help and the expertise to take on the other role. So when we talk about that business scaling and growth, it's a lot of that. What else do you need to bring on? Who else do you need to target? But not just who are you going to target, where are you actually going to get them from? That resource acquisition becomes a really big priority. And because the expectation is you're going to build that kind of talent pipeline for the future. This is going to be a key activity for your ultimate success. And it can be really hard to figure out where to go for that. There are a couple of things that you can do, a couple of really great sources. Things like incubators and accelerators can be a really good source for building that talent pipeline. They can bring in mentors, they have a wide relationship network, they can give you access to, executives. A lot of them have almost like a C-suite foundry, because you're going to need somebody that knows operations. You're going to need somebody that knows finance. You're going to need somebody that knows administration. Now, do you need to bring them on today? No. Do you need to bring them on full time during your phase two? Probably not. But you actually need to know what they can provide to you. You need to get them integrated into that kind of culture of the company. So maybe it is a consultancy they offer. Maybe it's, a part-time, 10 hours a month or 10 hours a week. They come in and say, yeah, this is how it needs to be. This is how this needs to be structured. Or doing things like building relationships with universities. A lot of universities will have really good internship programs. You can have a summer intern that you can kind of get them acclimated to what industry expectations are, how your business operates, what your goals of a business are. And then they become a really good point to actually transition them into an employee once they graduate, or being able to reach into their alumni network. There's also things that like economic development organizations can bring. If you don't have relationships to tap into with things like universities, labs, other type of, like state funded operations, EDOs are a really good place to actually go because they have those relationships. They can make those warm introductions. They can help you kind of knock down those barriers. They can help reach into the school systems. Things that you just don't have a first kind of person relationship, use those networks of networks. Use the relationship of relationships model. I don't know this person at, this particular organization, but I know someone who knows someone who knows someone. Can I kind of follow that trail? They serve as a really great bridge. And, particularly a big thing too with that phase two is going to be that kind of outreach. It really is deciding the direction of the company itself while you're doing your phase two. You're thinking about, again, those things about how to get into the market. Can you do it yourself or do you need other resources? Can you actually do internal, talent development or do you need external talent development? And you're just kind of putting that operational plan down on paper and going, who do we want to be 5 years from now? Who do we need to be? And if we want to be that 5 years, what do we need to do today? What can we do 12 months from now? What can actually wait for 24 months? This phase two transition is a big point where a lot of people and a lot of awardees will kind of start to build that strong business plan. And people often go, well, I'm building a business plan, but I don't know these things yet. I can't actually write my business plan. Business plans aren't static. You don't write one business plan and that's who your company is for the next 40 years. Business plans change a lot of times. You update them, you reflect them as your goals as an organization change, or the outside, regulatory environment changes, or there's something outside of your control that forces a change, or there's an internal thing that you've built up enough and an kind of internal capacity or capability that might allow you to pivot into a new direction. Again, really kind of the thing with your phase two and that transition into a phase two is you're going through the motions and you're writing them down on paper. You're going, okay, well, we want to be here in 5 years. We want to be known for this. What do we need to start figuring out? What can we start doing? What do we need to start lining up? So kind of just a couple of, final thoughts on that transition into a phase one and getting into, or transition into a phase two and getting into that phase two kind of mindset. So for a phase two, you're taking your phase one and you're cranking it up to 11. You're doing all of these great things, trying to figure out all these things, trying to just get okay, well, here's something that needs to be in place. Here's something we really need to figure out. Here's how we're going to change the world. 20 years from now, be a market leader, be in that global market. And you're just figuring out the steps to actually get you there. Kind of a reminder too, when you're thinking phase two, don't neglect to think of scaling the business, scaling the path forward, and scaling the team that's going to get you there. A lot of reviewers will actually focus on that when they look at things like commercialization plans. They will look at, well, is this reasonable? Does this make sense? And if you can explain why it should make sense, you can explain away their misgivings. They go, well, that wouldn't be how I do it, but sounds like they're solid. Sounds like they have a plan. And if they can stick to it, they should be able to make it. Remember, commercialization is, well, really at the heart of it is that 50-50 for phase two. It has to have the technology to back it up, but there has to be that just commercial idea for the future, and they both have to be strong. You can't have a super strong one you can't have a super strong one and then have a weak other. It just doesn't work out. You're not going to get funded. You need to have a strong idea for both sides of that equation. And kind of just real quick, as always, these series are being brought to you by, Peak Innovations and HTDC. All of the stuff we talked about for, well, how do I actually transition my phase two? How do I get in touch with people? The Hawaii SBIR program can be a really great tool for that and can be a really great resource for that. They allow you to have that matching grant. They give that technical and business assistance that you go, I just can't figure this out. I don't know what this is going to be. Or even, that phase zero reimbursement program that they offer for you to actually work with a technical person, you to work with a business person that can help you create those sections of your phase two proposal that are going to be a really big just assistance and you being able to get funded. And one other kind of highlight, and this will actually go out in the follow-up email, is a link to the upcoming event. HTDC puts on the Pacific Tech Conference every single year. Their 2024 event is going to be October 27th through 29th. And you'll actually be able to talk to the agencies. You'll be able to talk to program managers. Cindy dropped a link in the chat. You'll be able to get one-on-one sessions. I'll actually be there and have the ability to speak one-on-one with people. So hit that website, sign up. As soon as one-on-one schedules go up, you'll get a notification and you can kind of sign up just to sit down and talk with someone about those things that you go, I'm really interested in these programs. I think they can really help me, but I need to know the first step. Or I'm developing this and I think it'll be a really great fit for this agency, but I'd like to talk to a program manager just to see if it meets their goals, it matches what they do. Cindy, would you like to talk a bit about the event?
Hi, Del. Sure. Thank you. Oops, my camera. So yeah, it's coming up soon, end of October. It's focused on SBIR companies. We're going to have the program managers, the federal program managers there. So if you are interested in a certain topic, you can meet face to face with them without traveling anywhere, just down the street to the convention center. We're also bringing in customers that have challenges that they need solutions to. And we're also bringing other funding vehicles such as OTAs, prize challenges, and VCs. And we're bringing Dell down. Yay! So please register this month so you can catch the early bird rate. and meet a whole bunch of great people in person. Thanks, Del.
Thank you, Cindy. So that's actually going to end us off for this session. Do have some time for some questions if anybody has questions, but want to, again, highlight that our next session is going to be on August 28th, and we're actually going to talk about that beyond phase 2. Because as I mentioned, phase 2 is going to get you to a point, but it's probably not going to get you into the market. So what are those things that you can do? What are those opportunities that you can capture? What are those funding vehicles that can get you into the market? What's that depth and breadth of maybe supplemental opportunities that SBIR and STTR can kind of define for you? So if you really wanted to know about how you align those with that idea for that, think about the next 5 years, make sure you attend next sessions. We're going to talk about that and also talk about, looking at third-party investment, looking at equity funding, maybe looking at, defense rampway accelerators, those things that are going to help you take the end result of that phase 2 and hopefully make a product out of that and get it into the marketplace. But at this point, any questions from people, any questions from the audience? If not, as always, thank you again for attending. We're still trying to get last session's recording up onto the YouTube channel. So as soon as that's up, everybody will get the email from that. And hopefully that doesn't impact the recording of this one and getting it up on YouTube. But as soon as that's up, everybody that attended today or registered will get that email. It'll also have a link to the rest of the sessions, as well as a link to that Pacific Tech 2024 for you to be able to register and just attend and talk to people. Because that's a big thing with these programs is if you're one of those that you go, well, I just want to work on the technology, I don't want to talk to anybody, you're just not going to make it. Because a big part of developing an innovation, not an invention, but an innovation, is actually finding out if people want it, people need it, people can use it. The only way you're going to be able to do that is to talk to people and take those first steps now. Talk to program managers, talk to people that can help you figure out maybe some ideations, maybe can help you figure out some of the objectives you need to do, can help you figure out how do I go from things like a phase 1 to a phase 2? Because even if you're going, yeah, phase 2 is going to be in the future, I don't need to think about that. Before applying for your phase 1, you need to kind of know, okay, well, I can do this in the phase 1, and I think I would do this in my phase 2. You need to start to set those structures, set those pathways, and set those plans down on paper so that you can follow them and use them as a guide for success in the future. But thank you again. Sign up for next session. We'll talk about the kind of beyond phase 2. What else can you do? How else can you get funding? And we will see you all next time.